And hello, everybody. This is Jon Croft with Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft, and I am Jon Croft. And Rebecca's here. How you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing good. Hi, Jon Croft. How are you?
Doing well.
It's
Uh,
looking very purple
oh
back
yeah, I guess it is. Oh,
there.
good. Yeah, so I'm hoping to actually in the future get a backdrop behind me that's going to be black, like a black curtain,
Nice.
and that's hopefully going to make things look a little bit. I know a lot of people will like the color, like you said. But some people might not. And I'm gonna try to do something that's um, very standard. And so because I have multiple shows I'm working on, so it's gonna help me with some of those other shows as well. So I have kind of like a very standard theme. So it's just a black backdrop behind me. So have you had any media experiences this week, Rebecca?
Yeah, I just thought I would talk a little bit about Isla Vista worship.
Oh yeah.
As best as I have been able to understand it, they are a church, a small church community in California. In fact, there's an island, a really small island, uh, called Isla Vista. And so this is the church that's on the island, and it's
Hmm.
kind of a college. There's a lot of college kids there. And so from this church, this worship team have produced like some really amazing, like fully indie, fully worship, just awesome
I mean,
albums.
beautiful
And
stuff. Don't they love uh
yeah,
I forget the guy who's in charge of that, but doesn't he love like soul
yeah.
and gospel
So
music?
I don't know who's in charge of anything. It's hard to get a lot of information about it, but so there's this really great album by Mark Barlow
Mark Barlow. Is that
called
the guy?
Yep, and it's called Soul Hymns, and it's so good. It's just I mean, it's just like soul. It's like stuff you used to li like when you were listening in the car, then your parents were playing like the easy listening station, but it was actually pretty good. It's like that,
Yeah.
but worship. And it's very like fun and joyful and but also just very sincere. And so that album was like the first one that grabbed me, and you've got to check it out. It's so good. It's just called Soul Hymns.
It's
And
so good.
soul good. Um,
Hey, I think you just dated us, by the way. You're like, well, when your parents were playing the radio in your car when you were a kid, and they were playing the easy listening, and a lot of young guys are like, huh? When did that
what's
happen? Oh yeah, that's for old people like us. When they played the radio in the car. Oh,
yeah,
some people still do that, but
before Spotify and
back
Apple
in the
Music.
day.
So yeah, so there's soul hymns, and also I would say Allie Page, I believe, was part of their group for a time there. And she also has an amazing, amazing album. Actually, everything I've heard from her is really, really good.
Hmm.
And then I think the most recent thing they've done is Ethan Davis did an album with them, which I think is just called Charmed. Er, 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 er.
Really, really hard to see. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, you can
Oh,
kind of
there we
see it.
go.
There
There
we
we go.
go. But it's
Yeah.
backwards. So that album is incredible. It's called Charmed. It's very lighthearted, like, wow, I just met God and I'm totally in love. Like it's very like fun worship music to listen to and great album art. It's like all these collages of flowers
Mhm.
and funny, awkward pictures from the 1950s. Like it's just really
Mhm.
good. So I just haven't like everything they do is great. So they also have an outreach called Jesus Burgers.
Oh, nice.
And according to their website,
Oh, that's right. You told me about that. That's funny. Jesus
yeah.
burgers. Oh, by the way, let me do this really quick. An article that they had on Media Moses. See?
Ah, nice.
Charmed Isla Vista Worship releases instant praise classic.
Yes.
There's a good picture of the album.
That is a great picture of the album. I
It's a
love that
great
article you
album.
did.
Yeah.
Yep. Charmed by Ethan Davis and Isla Vista Worship. And
Soul
there's Soul
hymns.
Hymns, of course,
Yep.
by Mark Barlow.
I put that on here because I figured it was the best way in to what they do.
Yeah,
And then later you go to Charmed, and it's a great introduction to their work.
it
And here
is.
they are on YouTube. Charmed, Ethan C. Davis.
Yep.
So yep.
And they've got some other stuff too. They did something I think with Ryan Ellis and but I just can't wait to see what they do next.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, so they say Jesus Burgers, they have a Friday night barbecue in their little town of Isla Vista,
that's
and
fun.
they give away burgers with mustard crosses and ketchup hearts. Yep. They say they're trying to represent Jesus's love in an unconditional way.
That's got to be a lot of fun. Now that
Yeah.
all they need now is Jesus barbecue and Jesus burritos.
All the Jesus food trucks are
All the
out.
Jesus food. Yeah,
But yeah, it's pretty cool. They're really just really genuine lovers of God and they just make great stuff. So, um, there you go.
cool.
You can check them out some more.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and check out Media Moses too. There's other articles and other great people on there. And some of them we could talk about in the future. One of the like Josh Garrels, he's so great.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about Jonathan Ogden before on here, but Josh Garrels is great. My favorite band is Starflyer 59, so I love talking about Jason Martin. There's a lot of other great kind of like indie Christian stuff out there that I think is just far better than most Christian stuff. And it's kind of like the stuff I grew up with, which reminds me, there was this somebody doing a documentary, and I failed to like write an article on it. I like forgot or something. And now I need to look up my notes because it's like probably deeply embedded in my notes, which are like thick notes. And so I got to find out. But supposedly there was this guy making a documentary on old like 80s Christian rock.
Nice.
And that was, man, that was such a unique time for music, and great stuff from then. And what's a real shame is that a whole generation of artists can just be forgotten in 10 years, like, and still forgotten to this day, where most kids today, whether they're Christian or not, they have no idea all this great stuff. Like people today know who Johnny Cash is, but they don't know who any of these people are. And they were great musicians. I mean,
Mhm.
and you'd think too, because the 80s music is a little bit, it comes back in like vaporwave and a lot of other styles, and people still like to play with it. And that's a great place to go to get inspiration because man, they had some great stuff, like, and that was also the beginning of like techno music and all that stuff
Yeah.
that people thought was really cool. Like remember Mortal, Painted Orange. They were like a new wave type sound. There were so many great bands. People have just like forgotten. It's kind of a shame that Christian artists get forgotten like that.
Yeah. Well, Mortal changed their name, right?
Yes, they became Fold Zandura, I believe, in the mid 90s. And then now supposedly they've made a a breakthrough of some sort, and they've become um MorZan, which is like
Nice.
Mortal and Fold Zandura,
Wow.
MorZan. I think that they're coming back. in the shape of MorZan. And I'm not
Wow.
sure if they're going to go with more the Mortal sound or the Fold Zandura sound. My guess is more the Fold Zandura sound because that was kind of the direction they were heading. And even though I prefer the Mortal sound myself, um, and we need a comeback of that style of music, I think, the techno stuff. Um, I think they're going to probably stick with their Beatles inspired Full Zandura, kind of dreamy pop kind of
Oh,
vibe.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I don't like it at all. I prefer their Mortal sound so much better. Um,
Yeah.
and I loved how they used clips, little clips from movies and stuff in their Mortal stuff. Such a good that stuff you could play it today and it would still be just as vibrant today. Um, the word is alive and alive is the word existing inside the mind. I mean, just great stuff. That was the
Yeah.
Lucis album. And I
I,
loved the Mortal Fathom album. That was, I believe, the first CD I ever bought. Mortal Fathom.
oh yeah.
First CD I ever bought. Just a great album. They've got clips from the Dune movie in there. They've got all kinds of interesting stuff in that album.
What style was that?
I would call it techno. At the time, Mortal was techno.
Yeah.
They don't really use that genre term today. They call it like, um,
According to Wikipedia, it's industrial.
oh yes, I'm sorry, industrial or techno. Sometimes those things would overlap with each other.
Yeah.
Um, but industrial became more of the popular term for that.
Yeah.
And I guess because it was a little heavier, it was industrial. Um, techno, I guess, was more of a dance feeling,
Yeah.
which they started out actually with a little bit more dance vibe. And then look like a keyboard sound. And then later it became more like heavy guitars with Fathom.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's more, it's going to be more industrial at that point.
Yeah.
But I really miss that stuff. That's great stuff.
I was so thankful for them because I liked that sound so much then.
Yeah.
90s,
Yep. Early mid
94.
90s. Yeah.
Yeah, 95.
Well,
And
I think they really actually came out in 91 or 92. I think that was their
okay.
first thing. And then Fathom, I believe, came out in 94, maybe 93, 94. And then it's pretty much those first two albums that really, to me, just blew the socks off. Um, and after that, they kind of changed. They put out I think two more albums under the name Mortal, but it was changing into like the Fold Zandera sound. Um, and changed a lot. And I think they lost a lot of their initial fans by doing that.
Yeah.
I find that kind of story interesting with bands and it's always interesting to watch artists grow and change and transform into something new,
Yeah.
and then watch how people respond to it and react to it. That's always interesting, you know.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of bands like that are just like from the 80s and 90s that were just like such interesting people, such interesting bands. Um,
Well, I have a favorite,
yeah,
Joy Electric.
that's right. You love Joy Electric. He's Ronnie Martin, which is Jason Martin of Starflyer 59 fame.
Yeah.
His brother, Ronnie Martin, made an electronic, what would you call his style? It's such a
It's so
unique,
cool that they're brothers.
yeah.
Just electronic, I don't know, dance house, very poppy, very like very playful, like
Yes.
extremely.
Extremely candy coated, like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
It's
really
great.
liked
It's perfect for 13-year-old girls. I mean, it's just Right?
Yep.
And also, well, like, man, there's music I loved when I was 13, and I still return to it every now and then. I'm like, yep, I missed that
Yeah.
stuff. Just fun, fun music.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, he came out with a new album not too long ago, and it was it's still really good. It's like pretty much the same sound, but a little more mature. Like it's
he
just
stayed consistent, hasn't he? Pretty
very
consistent.
consistent. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really good. One of the main songs was From the dew of the morning, your youth will be renewed. That was one of the main songs. I'm like, that's a
I
really long title.
I love how he does that with his song titles as well. He's got like this
Yeah.
kind of Victorian era
Hmm.
style of speaking he puts sometimes, in combination with this kind of electronic sound. It's really interesting.
Yeah. It's
But of
fun
course,
stuff.
you know my style. My style is more like Jason Martin, which is like heavy
Yeah.
guitars, a lot of like, I don't know, stuff you would play on a motorcycle with a
Yeah.
cigarette dangling out of your mouth. It's more like it's like 50s surf rock or
Okay.
something. Um,
I was gonna say shoegaze.
well, it is shoegaze, but
Yeah.
also in combination with like this 50s surf rock, spy rock kind of, what did they call that again? That spy kind of sound. Um,
I don't know. Spy
yeah,
rock?
there's the term for it from like the 50s and 60s,
That sounds
I
cool.
guess. Yeah. Um, but like, yeah, so Jason Martin's, man, he's the guitarist extraordinaire.
Yeah.
Um, and but I don't know. Yeah, I just he also the thing that evens his stuff out is his love of stuff like the Smiths. Without that, the Smiths to like tone down his stuff so it's not so overly guitar driven. The Smiths does great sonic kind of like I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just like it's mild and beautiful and like lyrically wonderful and sometimes funny. It's just very charming. And so
Yeah.
that's you're talking about 13-year-old music. That's stuff I was listening to when I was 13.
Yeah.
And every now and then I gotta play the Smiths or Morrissey, just like to calm down or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
You get we in these weird moods sometimes, and that's stuff I have to return to. But and so sometimes listening to Starflyer 59 does that for me. I don't need, you know, to I always listen to the Smiths. I can just listen to them and get kind of the vibe from both of those. But these are like really unknown, mostly unknowns in the world of Christian music. And they're just very talented. They're like legit artistic work, like real artists, just loving what they do, and you got to admire that. But yeah, so I guess that's our media experiences, huh?
Yeah.
So I was gonna have you help me out
Yeah.
because I need to keep talking about development hell
Hmm.
because I want to get more specific. And so I thought if you wanted to ask me something, I thought the best thing for you to do is help me to kind of like talk about all the different scenarios of how to develop pictures through my own history,
Yeah.
and so I thought maybe you could ask me like about my different projects if you want to, you know,
Yeah.
and that could
I
really help
do.
kind of like bring it out of me. So
Yes.
go for it.
Uh, well, can you walk us through some of the different projects that you've developed?
Yeah. Should I start from the beginning? How should I do that?
I would say go with the one that stands out the most.
Oh man. Yeah. Um, I guess I will have to start from the beginning because doing that can help understand. Well, I guess I don't need to. Let's see. Floridiana is more recent, and that's a pretty important one to talk about. But also Blood Covenant is pretty important,
Yeah.
which I changed to the Double Edge. To change the title to the Double Edge. We could even talk about some of the work I did with other people. Um, like our shorts as well. But most of those I didn't really help develop, although I guess you could talk about the production side of that stuff. But that's more fun than it is really about development hell. There's a lot of fun stuff there. I'm really, when speaking about development hell, I think most people think about it in terms of the money situation. And the reason is because studios will develop stuff in order to make more money. So they develop it a certain way, right, in order to maximize their investment in this script, in this project.
Yeah.
And so that's why you get into development, right? Because you've got a script, but then there's a reason you have to change it. There's a reason you have to modify it, right? And kind of play around with it because the studio is trying to, get a better investment out of it. The important concept is to understand that there's this place in the process of getting your script and your story in which you're kind of in this in between place, which is between the idea stage and the script stage, and then the actual pre-production. And so there's this middle place in there in which you have to be really comfortable with changing everything around and being okay with that, like with listening and hearing other people, but also with just paying attention to the market or paying attention to all the different like elements that you need for production and saying, well, maybe I can't get this location, or maybe I can't get this actor, or maybe I can't, you know what I mean? Like, and and maybe this is telling me something about the story, right? Okay, so let's talk about, I guess we can go to Floridiana because that's probably the one I spent the longest time working on. And it's still even on YouTube, or not YouTube, it's still even on IMDb as a project that's in development on my IMDb, even though it's no longer in development. So to go into that, it had a very long gestation period. Um, and just to give an introduction to how I got there was through developing other projects, right? And seeing that it's really true that what you want to do is start with the assets that you have when you really want to shoot a picture. Because when I wrote Blood Covenant, um, it was about just writing what I wanted to write. It was about writing something fun and interesting, and it would get me over the hump of like difficult days that I didn't want to write or was discouraged. And so just the joy of writing could kind of take over because I was interested in the story, I was interested in the characters. I really liked developing it and coming up with new scenes, all of that stuff, because the idea, the grain of the idea to me was compelling. And so that was kind of the what I figured out pretty early on as I was reading about writing and about like making your first films. This is probably like a decade ago. Or longer even, maybe 15 years that I was doing this research, right? And on making my own projects. And then about I guess it was 10, 11 years ago, I finished Blood Covenant from all of that work. And that taught me because I couldn't shoot that picture. That taught me, and then there's nothing wrong with that. That wasn't outside of the plan, but it also was a little frustrating And so I knew that was going to happen though, right? So it was like, okay, now I'm going to use this frustration I've got to make something that is what you call producible, right? It's a producible project. In other words, it's possible for you to produce it. And so then you kind of get to kind of reverse engineer it based upon that criteria.
So
And
that's a really smart idea for people to, when they're writing, when they're thinking about making a project, to kind of look around them and see like what's available. Like, do they live in a cool city, or they live near parks, or
yeah,
an interesting location that they can, work into their script, work into their story, make it part of the story, which
right.
is kind of like, I feel like that's kind of like what you did with Floridiana. Is we live close to a skate park.
Yeah,
And so was that a part, did that play a part in your developing the story idea?
absolutely. Yeah, I find that location and actors tend to be the two biggest kind of hurdles of getting your project going. So you want to have locations that you have access to, and you want those to show up in like the essential elements of the story that you're writing. Um, you always have kind of access to interiors of locations. You can even make some interiors look like other interiors. And exteriors, you can often just get establishing shots for exterior locations, but there's certain locations that really make your story and give it a special visual kind of like beauty to it, or an interest to it, right? Or something that's unique about it that other films often don't have. And funny enough, that part of that is what kind of also ruined the story for me, which is well, I'll get into that later. But so I knew I had skate parks. I knew and there was multiple places, by the way, where we live where it's great for skating and it's great to get visuals because we're on the water. You can get like some dock or something in the distance. You get someone in the foreground skating, in the background you've got an ocean with palm trees. It's these are very interesting shots, right? And another thing I learned, the longer I spent in film, I realized quite often, when if you've got a lot of daylight and you do a lot of shoots outside, as long as you're not like outside all day or whatever, because that can knock you out, like um uh decommission you if you're doing too much of that. But like if you've got a lot of your script happening outside and the outside locations are beautiful, you don't have to worry as much about lighting, for example. And so I found that there's a lot of filmmakers who made beautiful work, and it's true that they were using film cameras, but quite often they would just shoot and they would have maybe just a reflector. If they're doing like dialogue or whatever, all you'd need is maybe a reflector or like a scrim or like a filter, and you automatically get great imagery because there's plenty of light. And then you just use filters on your camera to like tone down the light or tone down the shadows or what have you with like a filter. And you can shoot almost immediately as well. You can shoot like very quickly. So I was learning all these technical things about shooting, right? And shooting on location, etc. And that really attracted me to this project. Um, and so I don't know if you're seeing the like tendency I've got here. I'm a middle-brained person. And so a lot of people probably don't know what that's like. And it's I feel normal, but here's what I tend to do. I tend to go a little far on one side, and then the next week I'm going too far on the other side. And so I need to find this place that's not too far on either side. And so you can see that for me, Blood Covenant made sense for me to do because it was about passion, right? The passion of writing. But then Floridiana was practical. It was very practical and left-brained. It was very like, I know I can do this. This is all very possible. I've done the numbers. I've checked my equipment. I've checked my locations. All that stuff's there, but the passion's not there as much. And so when demands occurred, difficulties occurred, I was far easier to let the project go. Just far easier because the passion wasn't there, right? So, um, but Floridiana was a great project. It was about kids who were in trouble and needed encouragement and help to get through their difficulties and
Yeah.
often not finding it. And so it was about like kids having trouble in school and having no support, and a homeless girl who doesn't want to be found out that she's homeless, but she's trying to make it through high school, um and so she's like been held back in high school, so she looks a little bit older than the other kids, and but she's keeping a secret. She's not telling anybody. And these kinds of characters I thought were really interesting. But he was the thing for me that really made me lose the passion for it. And I know some people might say, John, don't worry about it. That's not a big deal. Well, when I saw mid 90s, that film, it really was a gut punch to me. And a lot of the reason was um, I didn't like the movie as much, but the movie was so much like my movie. It was a lot like what I was planning. And so many of those characters, I lost kind of like the romance for a lot of these characters because I saw characters in mid 90s that were very similar and they just weren't very likable. And I was like, huh, I'm not very interested in I almost confused the two with, like as the same story after watching it. And I also felt like the visuals on the mid 90s were probably better than my visuals. And I realized that my visuals really weren't very well thought through
Hmm.
because I was looking at the film in a very left brain, practical level. I wasn't looking at it on an emotional, visual level, right? With
Yeah.
like I figured I would get iconic imagery, but I wasn't actually imagining it. And I
Yeah.
wasn't actually holding on to those images. Um, and so the heart wasn't in it. And then by the time mid 90s came around and gave me a gut punch, I was like, I don't need to shoot this picture as much. And I also realized that I felt like my story was kind of weak. Like it really didn't resolve in the end. Now, I don't think mid 90s story was better than mine, actually. I think the mid 90s story was also kind of weak, but I felt like mine wasn't that much better. And that wasn't you know what I mean? Like it felt like if people did see my picture, they would compare it to the mid 90s and be like, this is just another mid 90s ripoff.
Mm.
And not knowing that I started writing this picture longer than, far before the mid 90s came out. Um, so yeah, a lot of those things took the romance out of it for me. And I realized that the story really wasn't, I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was doing it for all just practical reasons. I wasn't doing it because my heart was really in it. And I was actually trying to put my heart into it. Like I was trying, it's almost like I was purposefully being like, you're going to care about these characters, John, because this is really important. Like kids lost on the street. This is important to you. This tugs at your heart. It
Hmm.
does. Like it does, but the problem is the story and the characters and all these things are kind of manufactured in order to do that, right? It was almost like too purposeful, it's too staged, too practical. When you're an artist, I think you really have to sometimes make some decisions that just really seem impractical. And, but because you love it, you just keep pressing through. You're like, I'm going to make this happen. I don't care how. I don't really know how. I don't care how. I just have to, I just believe in this story and these characters and this whole, all and the images, right? I find that film is a visual medium more than any art form. And if you're
Hmm.
not like really inspired by these images, there's kind of something missing for you as a filmmaker, at least for me. So I found that all those things need to be hitting on all cylinders. And when it's not hitting, it's like you're doing this for the wrong reason. It's not, it's to get a picture made, which was what my reason was. I wanted to get a picture made. And I wanted to kind of press through and get it made. And there's certain fatal like things, mistakes you can make, and then you don't realize it until you get that speed bump, and then you're like, oh, this doesn't feel right, you know? And certain things also fell through, and that's true, but I could have, like, for example, I lost an actor. I could have gotten another actor. Like it wasn't really because of that. Um, but it was because I lost the whole romance for it. Um, so, I think what you have to do is remember that development and the money reasons and the practical reasons can't be your primary reasons. They have to kind of take a back seat to the primary thrust of your story and why you're doing it, which has to be in the heart, has to be a passionate reason, right? But then I can understand the difficulty of this as an artist because the difficulty is your film's going to have to go through a lot in development hell to make it there. And every time this thing that you have to be passionate about and love takes a hit, it's tempting to be like, whoa, and be like, yeah, but this is my baby, right? This is why they have these sayings, right, in the art world, which is like kill your darlings or whatever. It's like, well, you don't have to kill them, but you do have to let them go out there and get hurt, right? That is what you do have to do. And and that's a hard thing to do as a parent, right? As a creator, is to let these beautiful things get hurt. And so you're having to toughen them up. And that's really about toughening yourself up, right? You're toughening yourself up to criticism that's kind of unnecessary, unuseful criticism, unhelpful situations, and without malice, right? Getting through that. Because malice is just another obstacle for you. So if you apply, you can make a mistake too. It's not just other people. You can respond to other people's criticism wrongly. And now you've created another problem, right? You had a problem, something's in your way. But now the way you respond to that is actually creating another problem if you don't respond correctly. So you have to respond correctly to all these obstacles also. Can't just push through the obstacles. You have to also respond to the obstacle correctly, which is to do it without malice, right? And with that continual initial spark of love and passion for that project has to remain. You have to press through it and keep
Yeah.
that love for it, you
And
know?
I would say too, like, there are so many films that come out that are, there's just so many films that come out.
Yeah.
And um, many of them, like, are similar, unintentionally similar to each other. And I would never think, like, this filmmaker is copying that filmmaker. Like, I guess what I'm saying is like don't let because your idea is so similar to something else that has come out, like don't let that be a reason
Yeah,
to um to not create your film.
right, right. Well, and I've heard that, you know, you've encouraged me about Floridiana and other people have as well and said, well, who cares about that whole thing? You do it because you want to do it. And that was actually the problem is that by going through that obstacle, I realized, oh, I actually don't have the passion for this project that I thought I
Mm,
did, you know? And so that's kind of a test, isn't it? It's a test for if you're ready to do this project is when you do get hit, often it is a temptation, but it also is a legit concern for the project, which is if I'm having trouble, if I don't care, right, about it this early on, and I lose the passion for it this early on, well, how's it going to be later? It's going to be even worse.
hmm
And like I will probably let a lot of things go. Um, because there are certain things I think in a picture that you have to hold on to and be like, no, I'm not going to let these things go. Right. These are the things that give me a love for this project. And I think that's how really good experienced artists say, okay, here's my, like when they're asked to sign on to a project, often very experienced artists know what they need to get that project done. Like they have a definitive idea of what they need to get that project done. And then, and they're smart enough to let the other things go. Right. And so they know what to let go and they know what to hold on to. And then if the producer or the studio or whoever's working with them, investors or whoever is like, well, we're not going to give you those things you want, then they're like, okay, bye. They know how to say bye. They
Yeah.
know how to be like stick to their guns and say this is not negotiable. I need this thing or I'm out. And that is just very helpful as it comes to the end picture of what you're getting. Because if an artist loses the very things, which happened to me with Floridiana, right? If an artist loses the very things that they're going to need to finish that picture, like it's like the incentive, right? The real incentive, the real seed of the idea, the most important part of it. If they lose that, then they don't really have the incentive to keep fighting. It's just not there. You know, they can let a lot of other things go. They can let all these camera angles and all this, the actor and all these other things, story, plot, a lot of plot you can let go. But if you lose these essential elements, it becomes like just not that important to pursue. And these experienced artists know to just let that go right away. They
Yeah.
like I didn't know that so early on. I think as a more experienced artist, you get to kind of learn that you need to do that. You need to recognize those things earlier on. And I think that's part of development. I think part of development is like you'll write a script maybe, or you'll start working on a script and you're getting to know that story well enough to where you're like, you're letting your instincts kind of drive you a little bit and
Yeah.
say, these are the things about this story that I need to be there. They just have to be there. And if they're not, then I could take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And what that really means, I have to leave it because why waste your time? Why waste anybody's time? You're going to make a picture now that's just, there's no passion in it. It's not going to be that good of a picture. You can't just do it for the money. That's just not a good enough reason, you know? Because that ruins your reputation.
hmm
So you're no longer making good stuff. Why do people need you? You're just a dime a dozen director. You'll do whatever they say. That's not art. That's not what art's supposed to be about. So, don't just be a place card director. You have no character of your own. You have no integrity as an artist. Like you really can't run a career that way and identify yourself as a unique artist that way. So that's really, in a way, what identifies your unique artistry is to know what you can't give up. Like, this is really who I am. And you get that from kind of like the various projects you worked on, and you start discovering these are the things that I really care about most. It turns out that these are the things I really love the most, you know? And then you can be far more definitive earlier on and be like, this is what I need. This is what I can, I mean, there's an art of negotiation there as well that is important, but it's good to let projects go earlier on if they're not meeting those requirements.
I was going to ask you, what would you say was the hardest development process on a movie, and maybe just like a short story about why it was so hard?
Well, most of the stuff I've worked on was with other people, and that's
Yeah.
often difficult.
Mm,
And I think a lot of the reason is because people, um, like I was talking about what to know what to let go and to know what not to let go. That's really important because there's a difference between being that and being contentious. And they're very different things.
yeah.
Contentious is somebody who doesn't actually know what's important. They're doing it for they're being contentious because that's just their tendency. And so they're every hill is a hill to die on, right?
Yeah.
And so that's difficult, but that's more of like a people problem. Um, so development then is going to be really hard. You're always going to be pulling teeth. And that's just hard to work with people like that. I find there are people who like everything is precious, right? And then it becomes
Hmm.
like this power struggle. And that's just not a great way, I think, to do things. And when I was talking about negotiation, the art of negotiation, part of that art, and I'm not even saying I'm very good at it, but at least I'm aware of it, which is that part of the art of negotiation is knowing that there's things you can let go, right? Like I said, you hold on to things and and so that means everything else you kind of let go. But negotiation means you don't reveal that.
Hmm.
You don't reveal to the other person that you're willing to let that go. It's an
Mm,
incremental thing. And so
yeah.
you're holding on to things you could, you're kind of making it look like you're not going to let very much go. You're not very
Yeah.
flexible. But you don't have to be rude about it, right?
Yeah.
That's part of negotiating as well. You don't have to be rude. Generally, you barely ever have to be rude at all. You know, sometimes you do actually. And I think that's a very specific situation where you're dealing with people who won't listen to you otherwise. That's the time to be rude, right? Obviously you don't want to be rude in an unprofessional way, but yeah, there's a time to be a little obnoxious. Uh, and you're dealing with difficult people, you know. But like I think negotiation should be all about just talking. I think ideally it's about like you want win-wins, everybody gets a win. And so you don't have to focus on the negative so much, although that's the implication obviously is there. If you're getting something, you're not getting something else out of the negotiation. And so I find that it's people tend to get kind of precious with their ideas. And um that's just difficult to work with. So instead, I think what you have to do is both parties have to understand that you're trying to get somewhere, and that somewhere needs to kind of like come together so that you're both on the same team. and you're both trying to get this thing, which is have a great story happen, understanding that you have limitations. Everybody has limitations. I don't care if you're Elon Musk and your Disney studios. I don't care who you are. You have limitations, and it's good to know what those things are. And so when somebody tells you, well, we've got limitations here, Bob, don't get angry at those people. That's just weird. Like, what? Why do that? Talk about it and
Yeah.
be like, well, we'll have to do something else then. And how are we going to navigate around this? And so that's kind of like really working relationships is essential, where people aren't getting frustrated and angry. You're just talking about it as a together challenge. You know, you're facing this challenge together, and you both want this thing to happen. And there's no point in getting angry about it. There's just
Yeah.
no point to that. Um, it's one thing that is difficult is some people just come off as combative,
Hmm.
and that can be hard to deal with, but you have to recognize that pretty early on that, oh, this is just a person that comes off as combative, but it doesn't mean they're not on your side. And so you have to kind of recognize that and like make a joke about it or something.
Yeah.
So so that you can move on past the whole attitude thing and get to the meat of it, which is what are we really saying? What are we really doing and saying?
Yeah.
And kind of also there's a biblical principle here where it's like it's wise to overlook an offense, right?
Yeah.
So if you feel offended by someone being combative, that's actually the problem in a way, right? It's
Mm.
not that they're being combative, it's that you're noticing offense.
Yeah.
You're being offended by it. And so we have a choice to do that. So exhibiting control, self-control on these things is really useful. You can do that and not
Yeah.
take offense, you know. And so there's these working relation a lot of working relationships just solve that problem, you know. Trustworthy people where you know you've got the same goals. And what it is annoying though when people will like project, oh yes, of course, I'm on your side, blah 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 blah. But really they just want to make money or something. They're not really trying to get this picture made. You know, they've got bigger fish to fry, stuff like
Yeah.
this. This can be difficult to deal with. Because then you're using them for something and they're using you for something, but it's not because you have the same goal. These are very difficult situations sometimes, you know. And oftentimes I just recommend going with somebody else at that point, you know, find a way out of that situation because you might think you're in a working relationship, and that, oh, we'll just skate through this when they are really not motivated by what you're motivated by. And eventually that's going to reach a head and you could be in the worst situation possible and be in debt and you're compromised. And then that's when it's going to fall through, right?
Mm.
That's probably when it's actually going to hit the fan. So, you probably want to get out of that relationship before that happens, right? And if you can do that in a kindly way, so much better for you. Um, that's smart, I think, to be like, I wish we could do this together, but I have another thing I have to do. Sorry about that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
In a way
and
that is better if you have the clarity to see that coming to
yes,
kind of get out
right.
before there is a real conflict if you feel like you're not working well with that person.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of this stuff we probably don't need to talk about because some of it's just working relationship stuff. And that's another podcast. Like
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist or people person. I'm actually not even that great with people. I've made
Mhm.
so many relation relationship issue problems, like, um, and I'm working through a lot of that stuff myself. Uh, that's a lot of the reason a lot of my developments haven't worked out. I'm just being honest. Like, I'm a certain kind of person. I'm an artist. I care about a lot of stuff a lot of people don't care about. Like, I tend to follow this principle. The principle is it's a biblical principle, and it says the Lord trusts you with will trust you with many things when you're trustworthy with a few things. And so what I tend to do with others, I actually test people, the people I want to work with. Like, they don't know I'm testing them, but I am. One of the ways I'm testing them is I want to work on a big project with people. So I'll give them a small project. It's a small, piddly, small, easy thing. And if they're not interested or they don't care or they don't want to hear about it, etc., then I do not share the big project with them. Why would I do that? That is just a bad idea, right? So it's kind of similar to what we just talked about with like get out of that relationship before it really does hit the fan, because that's when that those differences are going to really be tested when it really matters actually. And then you're going to be stuck holding the bag, right? When things get really bad. So kind of get out of that if you can before it becomes before it becomes crucial, right? That you need
Yeah.
support and help. That's when they're not going to show up, chances are. So you'll be stuck holding the bag. Um, so test them with small things, right? A lot of people aren't that way. They think I'm going to put something big in that person's lap, and it's like jump starting the relationship, you know? I
Yeah.
don't tend to be that way. I tend to be like baby steps, right?
Yeah.
And if you're trustworthy with these small things, then we can do big things. So I actually have a lot of projects, a lot of film projects that are just a lot of them are ready and rearing to go. I'm just trying to find the right relationships and the right situations to make them happen. And mostly those things just haven't happened. So you got to get the right environment for lots of things to happen. And community and friendships are many of those things, just the right relationships, you know.
So what advice would you give to someone um who is in development hell and and um and maybe they're thinking about just not doing it, or maybe they're thinking like, is this really worth it? What would you say to someone in that situation?
Yeah, only they can know if it's worth it. I mean, nobody else can know if it's worth it. Um, I've spoken about how you have to test your projects to see, is this really a project you're willing to suffer for? Um, and if it's not, then either that project needs to be changed into something you care about, or you need to do a different project because it's got to be a big enough, beautiful enough project to where you're like, yeah, this is worth fighting for. And you got to kind of know that before you really, really pursue it. Um,
But it's a stretching process, isn't it? It's a challenge. I would say it's a challenge. Every time I worked on a film, I I wanted to get it. I wanted to make it, but I had this like, oh, this is so hard. But I had to
yeah, I
just
think
keep
it's always hard. Like in many
pushing through
ways,
that.
yeah. I mean, there's make or break situations, and I think generally those things are with people, not with anything else. Um, you can make so many things happen on a location or with equipment that you think you need different equipment and you just do it with the equipment you have,
Yeah.
or you do it with you know, actors are another situation, right? Where it's about people. Often actors just cannot pull off a performance. They
Mm,
just cannot do it. You cannot expect them to be what they're not,
yeah.
so casting is really important. And similarly with your crew members and your fellow producers and people developing, when those relationships are not happening, it's just not happening. Like it's not. So I'd say relationships are the most important thing of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Just the most important thing, and having trustworthy relationships is just like that's what makes everything work, you
So
know?
finding people you know you can work with, finding people you trust.
Yep. And for me as a Christian, it's often fellow Christians because
Yeah.
they're not gonna get what I'm trying to pull off half the time anyway. They're really
Yeah.
not gonna get it. They're like a lot of the stuff is based on Bible verses or my understanding of God and scripture. And like if you're not on that wavelength, good luck, man. Like people are not often just not gonna get it. Um, and they even might put obstacles in your path,
Mm,
because they're not down with what you're doing. They're not down with your messaging or whatever. Um, it does depend on the scenario, right? And because it depends on how, like, what is it like, what's making it development hell for you?
yeah.
Uh, and because you can do anything you want with your script and your story. I mean, you can do anything you want. People can say you can't, but you find another way around it, right? And so you can be crafty with how you change things around so that it makes a producer or somebody happy. Like you can find ways of doing that. It's just if, you know, sometimes like a lot of these issues are really people problems. Like why are you not happy with the script I wrote? You know what I mean? Like, and that's not meant to be an offended question. That's meant to be a literal question. Like speak to me about what is it you really don't like about this? And so, sure, people will sometimes tell you, but sometimes people won't tell you. And sometimes people are just wrong about it. Like sometimes people will be like, well, this won't speak to people. It's the wrong genre, it's the wrong this, or it's the wrong that. And often I think that that kind of insider industry information is not perfect. It's not perfect like observations about the marketplace. One old statement in Hollywood is that nobody knows anything. And that's a statement for producers. That's not, or for maybe actors or directors, above the line people, because it's like that is an understanding that you might have planned everything to work for this in this particular way, and it just fails. And you've got all the latest data, you've got all the latest information, you did all your studying correctly, and it just fails anyway, you know. And then you advise somebody else, oh, don't do that, and then they do it anyway, and they win. And they do it, it all works out for them. And you're like, I thought that was not going to work, and it worked. That's what that statement is supposed to mean, right? It's supposed to mean, well, we can guess the market's not going to like it. We can guess that all these market choices, all this market research is going to help us. Often it just doesn't. I mean, sure, there's some things that are important to do and to follow. There's some you know, good rules of thumb to follow. And some of them are more accurate than others. There's just a larger spread of data on this subject. than other things. Some of them are just based on how human beings work, so that's often better data. But like, a lot of that just takes a lot of experience. But then even then, that's the point of that statement. Even then, after all that experience, it could just all be for naught. Um, as it comes to giving encouragement, I think the passion for your project is going to pull you through. If you have that passion for your project, it's going to pull you through. And if you're not being pulled through, right, you're getting discouraged, it's probably again the same reason you don't actually have the passion for the project you thought you did. You know, um, I think being willing to adjust your strategy is a a mark of success in the film business. Being willing to adjust your strategy on how this film gets made, how it goes to market, what the film even says to the public. Being willing to adapt that strategy, um, you know, is very helpful. Very, very, very helpful. When a filmmaker, when a writer, when a producer is willing to be like, well, let's tweak this so it can work.
Yeah.
And that has to do with working relationships again. You have to be willing to go like, well, how do we make it work?
Yeah.
And have that relationship. There's a lot of just like, you know, um, a lot of this just depends on the script, on the genre, on the assets you have. And um, and then you move forward with all those things. You come to compromises and you move forward with all those things, and you see what you get. And sometimes more things will appear that you didn't see before as you move forward, and other things that you thought you had in the bag, you lose. And you're like, oh, okay. We lost that asset. But don't let that make you step back. Sometimes you have to keep pressing forward, even if you lose a really important asset, you know, and things that could be the way your script changes. You're just like,
Yeah.
well, maybe we don't even need this character. I mean, that can be a shocking decision for lots of writers or directors, but there are films that literally did that, or they add a character, and you don't think that these are these are often also instinctive moves by filmmakers. They're instinctive moves where you're like, I could just use a little bit of a different approach here. And something is speaking to me about it. There's very intuitive directors. We've talked about David Lynch in the past. He's what you would call an intuitive director. And he
Yeah.
actually talks about this too. He believes that intuition is this inner area of deeper thought, right? That a filmmaker can exhibit. And there's parts, he talks about parts in Twin Peaks where he's literally in the middle of shooting a scene, and then he gets somebody on set who wasn't meant to be there, wasn't an actor, and he's like, I want you to do this one thing. And he doesn't even know why he's doing it. He just has some intuition. And then he puts them in the scene, and then boom, now they're back to the script. And then in the editing room, he's like, oh, yeah, I have that shot. Why did I want to do that shot? I don't know. But in the example with Twin Peaks, it was a reveal that like blew the socks off of a lot of people in the series. Um, and that's kind of a creepy show. And so you can do weird shots like that Like that's just how David Lynch thinks. And then it kind of like you get things out of that. Like it's almost like a filmmaker like Terrence Malick is the opposite of that in a way, where he is intuitive, but he's intuitive in not a creepy way, but in a beautiful way. Right? He's like, I'm looking for beautiful shots, and I will just throw a beautiful shot in this, and you don't even know why I'm doing it. In fact, I might not even know why I'm doing it. It's just beautiful. And where there's moments of beauty or tragic beauty, he'll just have a shot in there, and you're just like, oh, like it's deeply compelling. There's some intuition involved in that. And in development, you have to understand that changes are sometimes um, very beneficial for everybody so you can move forward, you know? And I find that it's good to have multiple versions actually of your story. Like you're kind of like you have obviously you'll go through script changes, right? And so sometimes you'll have the different colored scripts, like, oh, we're getting to script, the green script by this time. And I don't even know which number that is, but like, you know, so you're getting through the script changes and that you'll have multiple colors of scripts. And that's like, oh, that's the old script. We're not using that script now. We're using this one now. And so you're going through changes, but then guess what? The reason you have those multiple scripts is so that you can go like, well, wait a second. Wasn't there something in the yellow script that had this scene in it and we removed it? Why don't we shoot that scene anyway? Because we might need that in the edit, right? So this kind of flexibility allows you to do something that's unconventional. Maybe that's actually not that unconventional in the film world, but it's like you don't know what you're doing with it right now. Similar to the David Lynch thing, right? But now that's doing that on a script level. On the script level, you're like, this could be a necessary scene, even though we're not planning on doing it. Let's do it anyway. And so that's a lot of the reason you have multiple script versions because sometimes when you're on set, you'll have an extra day, extra half a day of shooting or something because you're like maybe you can't shoot something then. Maybe it's raining or something and you can't shoot something. And so you've got a half a day of shooting and now you don't have anything to shoot that day. Well, guess what? You pull out the other script and you do have a scene that you can shoot. It just wasn't part of your initial plan. And so now you're shooting that other scene, which is from another script version. And then now you've got stuff in the bag for the editing room. And you didn't lose time, you didn't lose resources, you didn't, you know, and you can use your intuition that way too. But if you have multiple script versions around and you remember all these things, you can do interesting things with that. But my point is, again, my point is to be flexible and be willing to adapt at times. So know the impact of these changes, know how these changes might change the story. And I think a good filmmaker can have kind of a visual um, memory in that way, where they are seeing how these changes are going to change the edit in the editing room, and they're just seeing it in their mind. You know, that's very helpful. But making choices about the kind of stories you're going to be doing can really change what's going on. And this is the reason I say this is because it's changed me a lot. Is that I was doing projects, I think, for the wrong reason in many ways at the time. And now I've been realizing in the last 5 years or so that I was putting a lot of my best stories on the back burner because I didn't believe anybody would support me or believe in me, right? I just didn't believe anybody would support this idea because of that similar philosophy of right, if they're not going to support these small things and do these small things, how will they do the bigger things? It's just not going to happen. There was something there where I realized that I think I should be pursuing the stuff I really care about, regardless of if it's crashes and burns, because nobody cares about it, right? So this is when I started pursuing more like the kind of Christian, and I don't want to call it scholarly, but it's like the kind of work that I think a lot of people don't care about, but I think they should care about. Stuff like Paradise Lost, um, and a lot of other stories, that, like George MacDonald and stories that I think there's a lot of passion in there from me for these stories. And, I guess you could say they're the kind of stories where I don't care if you don't support me. I'm still gonna pursue it anyway, you know? And it I had to like go through a lot of failure, I think, to realize that there's certain kinds of stories that you will die on that hill, like, and you're okay with that. And those are the kind of stories you really want to pursue from the beginning. Like just keep pursuing those stories. And so I'm kind of getting to the end of myself where it's like, oh, there's these stories way down here that I've neglected because I was giving people what I thought that they wanted, right? And then I realized that as soon as I was tested, it was actually something I didn't want. I had to realize it was something I didn't really want, and I didn't really care about that much. I was just giving people what I thought they wanted. And that's actually not the best reason to do that, you know? And you'll find that similarly to that relationship problem, it's like get out before you really have a problem. Similar thing with projects, right? Like get out of that project because you don't really care about it badly enough. You know, you're not willing to die on that hill. I'll be honest, there's a lot of things I just don't care about. Like I just don't care about a lot of things, but there's certain things I need to be open about that these are things I really care about. And I've hid a lot of those things away because of a lot of rejection I've had. So this is my own personal moment to air those grievances, but like, or not. Uh, but yeah, I'm reaching the end of myself more as an artist to where I'm learning what I really care about most. And so now a lot of those projects I'm developing instead of the ones I was developing because the market was telling me to develop it or because my friends, gave me support on those projects. And I just have to be like, this is what I'm doing. I don't care what people think, you know? And so, should I mention the three projects that right now I'm working on? Um,
Yeah.
so as a result, I'm working on Thin Days. Um, and then after that, I'm working on um, Paradise Regained. And then I'm working on Paradise Lost. And so these three stories to me are the beginning of this journey, and they're all connected. All these stories are connected together. So they become like a unit for me that's all together. I could work on a lot of other projects too as a producer on the side, including some shorts, and I have some short ideas planned, but these are the real mother load for me is these projects, 3 projects right now. And so Thin Days is really about um the temptation, which leads to salvation, right? And so the victory, right? The victory that you experience through temptation against Satan in the desert of temptation. And that's actually what Thin Days is. It's about an unsaved man who goes through that and becomes saved through that same temptation. Paradise Regained is literally that story, except told by John Milton from Christ's perspective, right? Where Christ is experiencing that victory. And that's how paradise is regained. And then Paradise Lost is kind of like the prequel to all of those stories, right? That sums up all of them. And it reveals where mankind is right now. We're in the valley of decision. Where are we going to see that paradise has been regained or not? Are we going to be lost from paradise? Are we going to not be able to find paradise again? And so the question is presented to us now, will we regain paradise or not? We know the end of the story already, so I want to reveal the end of the story already. Paradise Regained is the end of story already. But then Paradise Lost is like, are you going to go on that journey or not? So I actually decided to switch the two stories in order to leave you with that question, right? And make you think about that. And so those are the stories that I find that I really care about. And, you know, because it's about the man upstairs, you know, and what he wants to present to mankind. There's some other shorter stories that I want to also develop because I want to develop those for the sake of others and the community, but also for the sake of my future projects after those 3, if that even happens. I don't even know if that'll happen, but that's okay. They're just things I want to develop as well. And sometimes you develop things through making a short movie, right? So, Screw Tape Letters, and to make a fan film that's similar to the Screw Tape Letters. It's
Yeah.
not the Screw Tape Letters, but it's inspired by the Screw Tape Letters. Um, and then from that, I think it would be cool to also try to develop My Dear Hemlock from, remember that other
Hmm.
story from this lady from Canon Press. Her book was um, put on Canon Press. And My Dear Hemlock, it's kind of like the feminist version, right, of Screw Tape Letters. Like, how does the devil tempt feminists and women,
Yeah.
and different because it's different than men, right? Some of it's going to be different, some of it's not. Some of it's just common to all people. But then there's a few other shorts as well, one of them about human trafficking. Um, and so these are things that can help a crew to form. You make a short film, you start forming crews, and then that will help you make the larger feature. And you'll find people also that way to help the kind of people you're looking for, right? That's often you do a short movie and you find the kind of people you're really looking for to do the bigger picture, right? Film development is, I think, a great process. It's just great. It's great fun. It's like script writing. It takes time, like script writing, but I think if you have fun with it and you enjoy yourself and do a little bit of work every day, it's just great. You have to work with the right people. So it's like you've got a script, right? Which is a process you're doing in yourself, and development is like putting that out there where you're doing that with someone else now. So without working in that relationship with someone else, you're really not developing anything. You're just kind of pretending like you're developing something, which I've done for sure. But development is really when you're with somebody else who's experienced, knowledgeable about the industry or the marketplace or something, or they're a great scriptwriter or director or producer. And so you are just kind of sharing it with them. And, it could be script development. Like that's kind of the same thing as just development in general. But often development in general is just like the overarching process. It could happen before you even have a script. It can happen after you have a script. Um, and so there's that larger umbrella of just development hell, you know? And so I don't know. What I hope to do is inspire fellow Christian artists and filmmakers to engage in that conversation about development because um, it can be a fun process, right? It can be a process where you get to just like discover the most important part about this story that you care about the most, and you're not willing to let go of that thing. That's what you want to find out most of all. Find out the thing that you're just not willing to let go. It's the most compelling thing about it. And then find ways to work with the other parts of it. Be like, how
Yeah.
can I wrangle this to make it happen? Often writers and directors are just so talented that they don't have to do much else to their script to make it happen. They've already kind of like, they're already familiar with what's possible. And
Yeah.
then, and then, a lot of this times this is difficult just for people who are inexperienced with working with others. And so they need to go do development because they need to figure out that this is a process that's important. And then number two, a lot of times you're doing it because the script isn't something that's easily doable. Like it's just a little too grandiose. And so to make it more possible to do, you're going to have to move some things around. And then I think though, if you're successful, you could get into a situation later on where money is no object and you don't have to develop as much, right? Instead, you're developing more in terms of like um the kind of genre and release you're putting out. So like we're doing this kind of genre and this kind of like the blockbustery thing or whatever. So this is why we are putting maybe some commercial interests in there, right? And so you have to do some more thinking about that. Because big risks demand big rewards. Um, and that's just kind of how blockbusters work.
Yeah.
Um, and like I think it is there's nothing wrong with shooting big later on. It's just initially you can't expect that. It's not like you're never going to get it. A lot of early directors get big things if they're lucky, but like um I don't think you should ever expect that. And so just kind of plan for your early pictures to be smaller, and that's fine. Know what to give up. Know that there's things you're going to have to give up. And but I think the next kind of thing is for people to figure out, especially fellow believers like me, or maybe conservatives. I think what filmmakers have to figure out is there's certain kinds of stories that are going to matter right now more than other kinds of stories. They're just going to matter more. And that's because there's things that people are dealing with in society right now. Society is shaped a certain way. And when you make art and stories that address that situation that we find ourselves in now, your film is just going to make a bigger impact on society because you're seeing the need in society and you're addressing that need. And when people feel like you're addressing their need, they really appreciate that. They really do. And so we're in a particular situation right now. This is a unique situation right now. A situation in which Christians and conservatives are not being heard in Hollywood. And what that creates is a groundswell of demand, a groundswell of demand. And so as soon as that, you could say it's actually above us. It's like hanging in the air. And what happens as soon as that need is met? It's like puncturing that thing. And then just bam, an overflow of people are just going to show up that you didn't know existed, who are like, yes, you're talking about the very thing nobody else seems to be talking about. So I would challenge Christian and conservative filmmakers to really go there and address the very things that our general society has been afraid to address because they might not know it, but there could be a big amount of people waiting to just be like and shower you with feedback and thank yous and just people who need to be heard and seen, you know? So I make a list. I think I called it the 9 kinds of stories or the 9 kinds of films that faith-based filmmakers need to make right now. And so I'm mostly speaking to faith-based or Christian filmmakers, but many of those are definitely for conservatives as well. Conservatives can find plenty there, such as the Dirty Harry type of films. But I leave us 9 kinds of stories that um, Christian and conservative filmmakers need to be making right now. And I will stand behind those 9 so much right now that I would say if you do not know what film you need to make, look on that list and don't make anything else. Don't like you got your script, compare it to that list, and if it's not on that list, just throw it away. Just throw it away. It's going to be a waste of your time and energy. And I do not say that lightly. I know that people have worked on scripts and maybe they have 20 scripts. But look at that list of 9 kinds of films because it's not films, it's kinds of films. There's a lot of films that can be made from that list. But look at what that list says compared to what you've got and go, why have I not been making this stuff? I'm trying to make stuff Hollywood wants me to make. That's why I'm making this stuff. Throw that away because very likely you made that other script because you thought Hollywood would want to see that. And we don't need any more of those films. We don't need any more of those films. And I think if you really want to make a difference in Hollywood, you got to throw those ideas away. Because I have a few of those myself. I threw them away. And now I'm feeling like so much better about myself as a writer, as a creator, as a filmmaker, because the stuff I'm making now, I think is going to be far more successful, far more successful. And I know there's people who um, probably would never believe that in a million years. But like, look at that list of 9 things and just challenge yourself to be like, why have I not been thinking about these 9 things? are these 9 kinds of stories. But those are the kinds of stories right now that could create a windfall of feedback and support from audiences. I guarantee you. So look at that list. See if maybe you can maybe even modify an existing story to meet those requirements. And if you can do that, oh my goodness, I think that you'll have a hit. I think you'll have a winner. Obviously, this is execution dependent, right? We talked about execution dependent stories last week too. But like it's execution dependent in the sense that you're still going to need to make a good film, right? It's just if you make it about one of those 9 things, it's going to have the potential to open up so much greater feedback for you and results and fan base might you might get a bigger, far bigger fan base. And how did I know this? Because of observing other films recently, like Sound of Freedom, that have punctured that. And then you get like a surprising amount of support from that. I'm noticing that right now happening on Angel Studios as well, where certain projects like Homestead, which are more male driven, will make 2 or 3 times the amount of money that the other projects that they're making, which are more the traditional faith-based or feminist projects, that they won't even get feedback. If you look at Angel Studios' X account, Twitter account, they'll put up posts for different projects. You'll see 3 times the amount of feedback on these male-driven posts. Go look at it. So like, like the men have been not rewarded for being involved, but they want to be involved. They want pictures that are male driven, stuff they're interested in, because we've been having feminist projects for so long. I mean, 50 years, 70 years, 80 years. Like these same kinds of stories. It's the same message over and over. And so I think a lot of people are just kind of tired of that, you know? Um, there was a film training program I was reading about in Oklahoma. And and then at the very bottom of all this great news and information, like, oh, how you can train for film, it said redressing inequalities or something like that. Redressing inequalities. Basically, they're admitting that they're a DEI program and they don't want white males. That's what they're telling you. They don't want white males, right? I think people are just getting tired of this whole thing. Like it's not like there aren't women that are married to a white male. You don't think that they want their husbands to have a job and be successful? It's ridiculous, So this whole idea of in order to be diverse, we have to shun white males. That doesn't even make sense, right? So you don't have to shun. The point is you shouldn't be shunning anybody. That's how to address inequalities. It isn't to shun people. It's to accept everybody, accept all the applications. Doesn't that make sense? We want to just shower love on everybody. I mean, that's the gospel. That's Christianity. That's how Christianity works. So people have taken it in the opposite direction, and now it's just hatred in the other direction. So that's not going to work, And I think people are sensing that now. They're sensing something is rotten about this. Something's become rotten in the air about how we're dealing with, people in employment, whether it's the human resources departments or wherever it is. Something's going on there that's not, and people are starting to sense it. It's like we don't want those virtue signaling statements, those politically correct statements that are supposed to make our business better. It feels rotten now, like rotten fruit. Not good. Used to be good fruit, right? Used to be fruit of the spirit. Now it's rotten fruit, you know? So people are gonna be erasing those statements, hopefully. We're not gonna, you know, we're not gonna be doing that now. We're just gonna love everybody. That's gonna speak a lot louder, you know, instead of all the political statements and the what would you call that? Sloganeering. Sloganeering, that's a good term. It's a lot of sloganeering. But I noticed that though. It was like, oh, this looks like a really good program. Then, oh, that means I'm not allowed there. Yeah, so look at look at that nine list of nine kinds of films. That's the kind of films we need to be developing, and there's a reason why. And I say the reason why and everything. So there's a
Yeah,
reason there. And if your film that you're developing can meet one of those nine kinds of films, I think you've got a winner.
yeah. The nine list. Check it out.
Yeah. Was there any last thoughts or questions, or should we call it a night?
I'm just looking forward to some of those projects you mentioned.
Yeah, there's three big ones. They got me excited too.
Yeah, especially I mean all of them, but especially Paradise Regained. It
Yeah.
sounds really good.
It's not even very well known by most
Yeah.
people. And I think even John Milton said it was one of his best, you know? So it's like, well, shouldn't you listen to John Milton? I mean, come on.
People want to live in the tragedy of Paradise Lost. They're not ready to embrace that maybe paradise was regained.
Yes, yes. It is finished.
Yes.
That was a cool thing we discovered, wasn't it, from Genesis? The other day we were reading Genesis and we realized
Yeah.
the plants hadn't even grown up, but
Yeah.
God said it was created. And similarly to Christ on the cross, he says it's finished, and people are like, what do we mean it's finished?
Yeah.
The creation has been created and we just don't see the results of it yet. It's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah. And that's like the stories in our heart that we're developing, right? We've created this film in our hearts and it just hasn't been materialized yet.
Hmm.
But if we keep believing and working and struggling in Christ's name about it, he can just grant us these things. And it's not even been finished yet. It's just like, no, it's finished in the mind of God.
Yeah. Believe to see.
Believe it to see it. I love that. We need
Mhm.
to make a t-shirt with that on it.
Yeah.
Believe it to see it.
Leave it to see it. That's
That's
your
right.
film.
Well, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep believing it to see it. And thanks, guys, for hearing me out. And development hell does not have to be development hell for you. It can be development heaven. So where can people find you, Rebecca?
Oh, I'm writing on Substack. You can find me there at just Rebecca Croft and also on YouTube, Rebecca Loves Jesus, and Facebook, Rebecca Loves Jesus.
Oh,
Where
yes.
can people find you, Mr. Jon Croft?
I'm hoping to go to Substack more soon, but I'm mostly on YouTube and X right now. At X at the Media Moses and X at John Edward Croft, and on YouTube at Culture Warfare with John Croft and at MediaMoses.com.
Yeah, that's where
All
you
right.
can find a list of nine.
Yes, the 9 is on MediaMoses.com. Give me a
Yeah.
visit on there. And we're hoping to hire more writers sometime soon and get our subscription models up and going and make a real platform that makes a difference in the world. All right, guys, love you. Have a great weekend and stand up for the culture. All right,
That
guys,
was a
have a good
long one.
weekend. Just going to get longer every week. Have a good weekend, you guys.